Okay, for March, really what we're going to be looking at is progressivism, but because progressivism is too broad and it encompasses other isms, we're going to look at those other isms that build progressivism. What predominates the academic landscape in America today is progressivism. If you go to a government school, by governmental mandate, they must follow the particulars of progressivism. Therefore, they must follow what progressivism is built on, which is empiricism, rationalism, and romanticism, among other things. But those are the three main legs of the three-legged stool. Okay, so we're going to look at that. But first of all, we're going to examine the scripture memory that we've got, and then we're going to apply it to these isms. So in front of you, you should have a yellow sheet. If you don't, raise your hand. Can somebody get yellow sheets back there? Anybody have extras over here? Thank you, Eudora. Okay, so let's look at the scripture together. Proverbs 6, 5 through 8. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones." Trust. There's a lot to be said about that before we even get into the next word in this verse or this passage. Trust. This is a word that needs to be tackled and clearly understood before we do anything else, because there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding here. We too frequently equate trust with belief, but they are not the same thing. Belief is simply an acknowledgement of the existence or properties of something. I believe that Joe Biden exists. I believe that the pew in front of me over here would hold me if I sat on it or stood on it. I do not, however, trust Joe Biden, no matter how convinced I am of the pew that is in front of me that can support me. I really don't trust it either until I actually sit on it or stand on it. In order for me to exercise belief, I just need to acknowledge something. In order for me to exercise trust, or what the Bible calls faith, I have to actually act on it. Now, he continues, trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord is quite different than belief in the Lord. James addresses this in his epistle when he rhetorically asks the question, "You say you believe in God, the demons believe in God, and they shudder. Show me your faith without works, and I will show you my faith by my works, because faith without works is dead." And I don't know if you know the history of this, but initially Martin Luther was not a big fan of this passage, and he actually wanted to leave it out of the canon because his initial understanding of this text was that this is actually promoting a works salvation. He eventually came to his senses, as did the entire Reformation movement, and we realized that that's not what James is saying here at all. What he's saying is, if there truly is faith, there will be a resulting action. So it's not the good works that bring salvation, it's salvation that brings the good works. And if salvation is there, we're going to see a changed person. So, what James is saying here is, so you claim that you believe in God, big, fat, hairy deal. The demons believe, fallen angels who set out to undo God's righteous reign as his sworn enemies. They believe in God. You and the demons believe in God's existence and even acknowledge his properties. I would even argue that the demons are clearer on who God is than any one of us are. I never had a direct physical, if you will, confrontation with God. He never knocked me out of heaven. The demons can say that they've had that confrontation. They know him much better than I do. Believing, therefore, really means nothing. The question is, do you trust him? Do you have faith in him? If you did, it would be manifest in your actions. We live in a day where it's popular and it's frequent, that a preacher preaches about the gospel, and then they invite anybody who wants to live forever in God's presence to come forward, to walk an aisle, to pray a prayer. And people do that, and the pastor tells them, you are now saved, you're now okay. I would argue that that's premature. We don't know that. I don't know that I or anyone else is supernaturally changed until we see the evidence. So the question is not do you believe, but do you trust him? Do you have faith in him? Instead of seeking sinful pleasures, if you had faith instead of just belief, you would trust God to satisfy you by enjoying his creation the way he intended. Instead of seeking significance through trying to get fickle man to applaud or even worship you, if you had faith instead of just belief, you would find your significance in being an image bearer of God and seek to display him to others through your life. Instead of lying, cheating, and manipulating to get what you want in life, if you had faith instead of just belief, you would be honest, follow the rules God has made or appointed his rulers to make, and trust God to be the master of the people around you. If we think about the illegitimate ways, the sinful ways that man seeks to find pleasure, taking drugs, doing all sorts of things that he shouldn't do, what he is doing is he is not trusting the creator of his being to satisfy him, and what he's doing is he's turning to his own immediate solution. And it is immediate, but there's always a hangover, guys. Always, without fail. So, he says, trust in the Lord. So trust, don't just believe, but trust in the Lord, not anything else, with all your heart. Now, here's the problem with that phrase, is that we tend to picture in our minds our heart, and we tend to see it in varying measures of quantity. It's either partially full, completely full, 75% full. And when he says, with all your heart, we picture the whole thing red, right? Kind of like a diagram or a graph. That's not what he's talking about here. What he's talking about here is the heart should not be divided. Your heart is divided when you trust God with some aspects of your life, but not with others. Our posture tends to be, I can trust you, God, with my salvation, but not my money or my love life. Okay? I can trust you, God, with my time on Sunday morning, but not with my time on weekdays after school. I can trust you, God, when I see it, but not when I can't. So what we do is we segment, we compartmentalize, and we divide up our universe into things that we can trust God for and things that we can't trust him for. And in so doing, we then have a divided heart. Again, James addresses this when he says that when we selectively trust God with things, we cannot expect anything from God, being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. So here we want to trust God, and we want to find him trustable, but here we're also told in God's word that if we selectively trust him, and we trust him with some things, and then decide not to trust him with other things, we can't expect him to be trusted with anything, okay? We also know that God gives grace to the humble. The humble are those who say, okay, God, whatever you want from me. I'm not going to approach you with a divided heart. I'm going to trust you with everything, which is different than the individual who has their attentions divided. So, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Now, that seems like an odd phrase. He says, don't lean on your understanding. Why should I not lean on my understanding? Well, because my understanding of anything is extremely deficient. Even if I know more than you and understand more than you and everybody in this room put together, it still falls short. However, God's does not. So my understanding in anything is going to be somewhat flawed at least, and God's is never going to be flawed. Therefore, I'm better off putting my trust in his understanding rather than my own understanding. My understanding is extremely deficient. I may know what is going on in my immediate vicinity because I see it, I hear it, I feel it, I taste it, I smell it, whatever. But I don't know what is around the corner. I don't know what's coming. I don't know what's going on in the other room. My understanding is limited to immediate sensory perception. But even with those, my understanding becomes even more limited because I cannot perfectly interpret my immediate sensory perceptions. However, God, on the other hand, knows all things, all times. He knows all things longitudinally through all time and latitudinally through all space. There's nothing hiding behind a wall for him. There's nothing that he can't predict that he doesn't know is coming. He knows what has happened in all places and all times. He knows what is happening in all places and all times, and he knows what will happen in all places and all times. How much more reliable is his perception of things and his understanding of things than my own? I can't do any of that. So, no one knows how things will work better than the creator and the sustainer of the universe. So why don't we just trust him? So, examples. You fall for that girl or that guy who doesn't reciprocate your affections and your world is wrecked. You think life is unfair and you will never find better. Oh my. If you're God's kid, you have his promises, though, of protection and guidance in your life. He knows better than you do. Trust him. That relationship that you're trying to pursue, that circumstances just keep trying to get in the way of. Step back. Okay, God, I'm going to trust you with this. If you want this relationship to happen, make it happen. If it's not going to happen, I'm trusting that you know better and you are protecting me from something. Had I gotten my way whenever I thought I should have in my limited understanding, I would have married the wrong person. I would have gotten into the wrong line of work and moved to the wrong part of the country. And that's just the start. I think about what I do here. Had I gotten my way, I never would have ended up here at GCA. I was pursuing application with the FBI to become an agent in anti-terrorism, and I made it really, really far. And one day I get the cut slip in the mail, and they tell me, we're not going to tell you why we're cutting you, so don't even bother asking. And they had actually told me ahead of time, you're not going to get in here because you're white and because you're male, but that's a different story. But I got much further than they thought I was going to get, and I got much further than I thought I was going to get. And when they cut me, I was devastated. And I couldn't figure out, I'm awesome. Why wouldn't you want me? I'm ready to shoot every bad guy on the planet. I'm a great FBI agent. And I couldn't figure out why God would not have that for me. But then it was about... it was at the same time that we found out that we were pregnant with my first child, and he was born, and it was a month later that the towers came down in Manhattan, and they took the entire rookie FBI team and shipped them overseas for 2 years. So had I gotten my way, I would have missed out on the first who knows, at least 2 years of my son Hunter's life. So that was one of those moments in time where God really kind of stopped me, kind of punched me in the head. And it was there where I started to say, okay, now I see why you made a decision that's different, not just different, but opposite of one that I would have made. And I see why you did it, and I'm grateful that you did it. So from here on out, I'm going to trust you. Now, do I struggle with that every now and then? Absolutely. And another time, I went to visit my uncle in Colorado, and I had a friend with me. The two of us were actually going out to California to be trained in the ministry. And she had a habit of dragging her heels and making us late to everything. So my uncle said, okay, if you're going to go into Boulder, make sure you get out of Boulder before 5 o'clock. That's rush hour, and that's when all the traffic kicks in and you'll never get out of there. So we're climbing around the mountains in Boulder, and I'm like, okay, we got to get back in the car. We got to get back in the car. We got to get back in the car. And she's just dragging. I don't know why she's so slow. But we got in the car, and we're headed for Boulder right at 5 o'clock, rush hour. And I'm mad. And I'm going, you did it again. We're going to have to sit here for 2 hours in traffic. And as we approached Boulder, bright sunny day, beautiful day. And we're driving through Boulder, through the main street, and there are trucks laying on their side and upside down. And there's trees laying all over the place. And I'm going, what in the world happened? And I pulled over and found a police officer, and I said, what just went on here? And he said, it's good that you weren't here a half hour earlier because a tornado came ripping right through the middle of the city of Boulder. And it came right down Main Street where we would have been. And so another one of those cases where I didn't get my way. Thank God I didn't get my way. Praise God that He understands infinitely more and better than I do. I need to trust Him, not me, and I need to trust Him with everything. Not with a split heart, but with a full heart. And when it kills me inside to do so, I still need to trust Him. There are times when it is killing me inside, that I can't have what I want and I can't do what I want. But because of what God has shown me over and over and over again, combined with what He's told me in His Word, it kills me less and less because I know that there's a reason and there's a purpose. And it's one that I just don't see yet. And I may never. But at the same time, sometimes He does graciously give me a glimpse into what I missed out on. So that time I got rescued from getting sucked into the heavens in a tornado. So that was good. We have to think like Joseph when through the selfish, mean, unjust actions of others, he got separated from his father. He got sold into slavery. He got arrested for a crime that he never committed. He spent years in jail only to be forgotten about. And then when he saw how God used every one of those things to get him where God wanted him to be, as the second in command of Egypt, he acknowledged that what those guys meant for evil, God was behind the whole time. He knew what He was doing. He saw what was behind every corner. He saw what was down the tunnel of time. And what God did was He controlled all of it along the whole way, and was using even man's vile nature to steer Joseph. A lot of times we think, well, this can't be God's will because this person is acting evilly. Guys, God still is in control of that. He controls evil people. He uses Satan to accomplish His will. Satan's just a puppet. Verses 6 and 7 are basically a reiteration of verse 5, given for us for clarity and emphasis. It begins in 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. And then it continues, in all your ways, not just the ones that you select, but in all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Now, because we are reading from Proverbs, we've got to understand Hebrew poetry here, and I'm sure a lot of you do. This is probably not going to be new to a lot of you. But a lot of times in Hebrew poetry, especially in Proverbs, we see the author write something and then immediately write it again just in different words. And that's exactly what he's doing here. He's saying, trust in the Lord with all your heart, which is in verse 5, is the same thing as in verse 6. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. Not just some of your ways. Don't be selective. Do not lean on your own understanding, in 5, is the same as be not wise in your own eyes. In so doing, God will make straight your paths, but fear him and turn away from evil, knowing that if you don't, he has the authority, the right, and the ability to severely booger up your world. He does. And he's done it to me, and I had it coming. Now, let's back up to fear. Talked about this before. We'll talk about it again because it deserves repeating. There is fear, and then there is terror. We, as God's children, are to fear God. We are not to be terrorized by God. And this is what I mean. The individual who, let me actually, sorry, I'm going to use my family. I know she hates it when I do this. In my home, I run the home. And when my children do what I expect of them and what I ask of them, and I am pleased with it, they are rewarded because I have the power, the position, the authority to reward them. If they go against what I say, I also have the power, the position, and the authority to penalize it. Okay? And because they know who has the upper hand in the house and who has the responsibility in the house to control that, there is a healthy fear. It's a respect. But what goes with that fear is also an acknowledgement that I will do everything I possibly can to provide for them, to protect them. So it's a fear within the context of a safety net. Okay, it's very secure for them. The individual who breaks into my home to do harm does not have the same privileges extended to them. They come into my home, I will not withhold my wrath. They will at least be injured, if not killed. Okay? And I'm serious about that. They don't have the same fear. What they need to experience is terror. Those are two different things. Okay? So, following this, this fearing the Lord and turning away from evil, and by the way, the reason that God's children turn away from evil is because we know that there's a way that God created us to function, and if we function according to His creation, things go well. It's kind of like if you put gasoline in your car's gas tank, it will function well. You put orange juice in there, it's going to break down. Okay? There are ways that God has created you to function. You drink orange juice, you will function well. You drink gasoline, you're not, right? Because you weren't designed that way. Sin does the same thing as drinking gasoline in a spiritual sense. As we trust God in all we do, it will bring healing and refreshment to our being. On the pre-side of trusting God, before we trust what He has told us, we think and are often afraid that we will be disappointed that we won't get our way. Okay? So if I don't please myself by taking drugs or drinking alcohol or watching things on the internet that I shouldn't be watching, or bragging about myself in order to get applause from those around me, etc., 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 I'm afraid that if I don't do those things, I will not be satisfied. Every one of those things is sin, though. And if I stop and I allow God to take over and I say, okay, God, I'm afraid that I'm not going to be satisfied if I don't take action here, but I know that the action I want to take goes against you. It's sinful. So I'm not going to take it. And I'm going to trust that you are going to satisfy me in an authentic way, in a valid way. Okay? So, on the pre-side of trusting God, we're afraid that we will be disappointed and not get our way. Sometimes we give in to not trusting Him, and that's when we sin. We do things our way, and we end up flooded with guilt, with doubt, with insecurity, and always with negative consequences. Always. On the post side of trusting God, however, we end up with a clear conscience once we've trusted Him, feeling fulfilled that we did the right thing, and are able to rest in the security of that relationship with God, knowing that He doesn't have to oppose what I have done, but instead is pleased with me. God gives grace to the humble, right? But he opposes the proud. Now, that verse doesn't mean the guy who's walking around with a haughty look going, I'm the man. The humble in that context is the individual who abandons trust of self and trusts God. The proud is the person who abandons trust of God and trusts self. Okay? God gives grace to the humble, the one who trusts him. God opposes the one who trusts himself. So, the individual who keeps trusting himself, how's that working for you? It's not going to work. So now, with understanding, we can read the passage again. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. You guys run into temptations to sin, you can be confident that if you turn away from it, and guys, it's okay to say, I don't know what else, I'm going to go run around the block, okay? But if you turn away from it, you will be satisfied. You will be fulfilled. That is the way God functions. So, the question now is why the isms that we have for March? How do these go with this memory passage? Well, empiricism, rationalism, and romanticism are what I would like to call the unholy trinity of progressive education. They are what others have called the viruses of the mind. How do they work? Why are they called the viruses of the mind? And why does it matter? First of all, they matter because they are the three main philosophies on which our nation's public school system is built, and many of our private schools. They are the ideas that underpin what our government schools teach and how they teach. And guys, know that every time a student that we've had here at GCA leaves here to go into the public system, I am devastated for them because I know what they're headed into. I spent 11 years in there teaching it. I was reprimanded for working against it, and I know that it offers nothing good, okay, at least philosophically. Let me back up. Empiricism, let's define that. Empiricism was most clearly articulated by Francis Bacon, who died in 1626, just to give you a time frame of reference. He is the father of the scientific method, also known as the Baconian method. Please don't hear me saying that the scientific method and the Baconian method are a bad thing. They're not. They're good. Unless you misapply them. That's what I'm going to go after. While this method can be quite credible when applied to scientific study and experimentation, know that its broader application to knowledge in general, especially the social sciences, ethics, and religious studies, is very dangerous and contributes to the central problem described in Romans 1:21. Well, what's the problem in Romans 1:21? Paul says in Romans 1:21 that for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking and their foolish hearts were darkened. So man runs into God's creation. God's creation was designed to draw man's attention and understanding to God, and man responds incorrectly and says, I see what I see, but I know it didn't come out. It's not here because God put it here. It's all here by accident. Evolution, Big Bang, etc., etc. What then follows, if you read the rest of Romans chapter 1, is a growing corruption of man's body, man's mind, and man's morality, simply because man did not honor God as God. Empiricism, if you apply it to examining a rock, okay, it's good. We look at the rock. We use our eyes. We bang the rock on something to see what kind of tone it has. We taste the rock. Sometimes you'll get a sulfur taste or a salt taste. We smell the rock. We burn the rock. We do all sorts of things with the rock that we can observe with our five senses. That is the scientific method, and it is a valid method to examine something in the hard sciences. On the other hand, how do you test whether something is right or wrong. You can't. And if you go into the public system now, and I say this from experience because I was reprimanded for calling anything right or wrong, you're not allowed to discuss morality. It's forbidden. Bacon held the idea that knowledge can only be derived from the sense experience, that things can only be known as long as they can be detected by the five senses. John Dewey, founder of Columbia's Teachers College and arguably the father of modern American public education, made it clear when he steered our nation's academics away from the gospel that if a thing cannot be felt, heard, smelled, seen, or touched, it must not be taught. He went to the extent of expressing that to teach a child morality is to do that child a disservice. So understand that those government schools that I used to teach in held that for me to teach a child in that school morality was evil. Do you understand that? That's why we do what we do here. The ancients, on the other hand, had an entirely different idea. The Greeks and the Romans of the classical period held that before you can rightly discern what is detected by your five senses, you must first hold to a clearly defined structure of virtue by which you can then rightly interpret what your senses detect. The Christians came along and said, we know what that structure of virtue is. It's knowing God, knowing His Word. Empiricism, which is the seed from which the majority of American education grows, demands that we walk by the senses and not by ideas. So, Chuck feels like a woman today. So he comes to school in high heels and a dress. Something I actually experienced in the public system. No teacher in that institution is allowed to put an end to that. He wanted to use the girls' restroom, and I wasn't allowed to stop him. Why not? Well, because he feels that way. Dr. J.P. Moreland, former professor of mine, rightly identifies that we have digressed from being an ideational society to a sensate society. Scripturally, this ought not be. We are to do the opposite and walk by the ideational and not by the sensate. Or walk, in other words, by trusting the one who made it and not by our own senses. My feelings get skewed. Could be affected by what I ate this morning. Could be affected by the medicine I took last night. Could be affected by the test I just failed or passed. René Descartes, who died in 1650, added to the trash heap of governing godless philosophies by contributing rationalism. He stated, I must once for all seriously undertake to rid myself of all the opinions which I had formerly accepted, and commence to gild anew from the foundation if I want to establish any firm and permanent structure in the sciences. Now, that was a lot of verbiage, so what Descartes is saying here is that the best way to learn about something is to forget about everything you've ever learned in the past and examine it brand new. Again, valuable exercise in the hard sciences. Okay? Ms. Inborn, I'm not trying to work you out of a job here. Yes. Again, this works fine when you're examining a rock. Take the rock, look at the rock, forget about anything you've ever learned about the rock, and start to examine it intentionally from anew without any influence from previous preconceived notions. Forgetting everything you know about the rock, for example, and then examining the rock without any influence from outside knowledge can be a very valuable practice. Where this is horrible and very dangerous, though, is when considering the soft sciences, the humanities, psychology, theology. If I study the behavior of a serial killer without any preconceived learning about the sinful nature of man, I'm going to draw a very specific conclusion about his reasons for killing and then his rehabilitation. If, however, I consider the serial killer from a biblical worldview that views man as a moral agent who is intrinsically evil by nature, my conclusion about what he is responsible for and how he should be treated will be very different. Biblical worldview, non-biblical worldview, antithetical conclusions. At the heart of rationalism is the idea that to know anything meant first to doubt everything and to discover that which is discoverable through the five senses. Welcome to the government schools. We would be disobeying God if we held true to this method as Christians, though, when it came to our Christian walk and our understanding of the Scriptures. Deuteronomy 11:19 gives us a command here that we must obey. You shall, talking to the parents, teach these things of God's mandate to your children, talking of them when you are sitting in your house and when you're walking by the way and when you lie down and when you rise, basically all the time. I, as a parent, am obligated by the mandate of God to constantly bring to my children's attention what is biblical and what is godly. As a result of the doors that were opened by empiricism and rationalism, in walks the nail on a biblical worldview's coffin, and that's romanticism. Where there's value for empiricism and rationalism, in my opinion, there's really no value in romanticism. It's only destructive. While many contributed to this anti-biblical philosophy, the one who's most guilty is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who died in 1778. Rousseau argued that man was naturally good. End it right there. Is man naturally good? We are born evil. At least my Bible says that, and I don't have any reason to dispute it. I know me. He says man was naturally good and born free, enslaved only by society and its moral demands and trappings. As a result, man must be freed from such constraints and allowed to follow instead his emotions and natural feelings as the path to truth. Trust your heart. While the Scriptures teach us that man is born with a wicked heart, slave to sin and determined to rebel against the Creator, the Romantics teach us that because man is born good, his impulses are innately and intrinsically good. While the Creator tells us to seek wisdom and knowledge and to detest simplicity, Romanticism teaches us that we are at our best when we are at our simplest, our most primitive, or our most animalian. While the Lord tells us that God's law is good, that His correction and discipline are good, and that our senses are what drive quarrels and conflicts among us, Romanticism holds that the external restraints of rules and laws or moral mandates are simply man-made constructs designed by those who rule to control the masses who are to be ruled, and that society should run itself perfectly if man was released from these imposed restraints. So basically, remove all the laws and society will run perfectly. 1 Corinthians 2:14 states, "The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned." Jeremiah 17:9, and if you forget everything else, remember this, because this strikes at the root of Romanticism. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Bacon, Descartes, Rousseau, they were all wrong. Their ideas are clearly antithetical to what God identifies as the nature of man and of knowledge. Yet we have an entire academic industry which then feeds into all other industries that derive their life's blood from these false ideas. Unfortunately, we as Christians have been blindsided by it, and we've embraced it ourselves, really without much fight. So, the application here is for each of us to consider, where have I bought into these ideas of empiricism, rationalism, and romanticism? Am I to follow my heart? No, may it never be. The heart is wicked. The only hope for my heart is for it to be redeemed by the Savior. Proverbs 6:5-8, and we'll end on this. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones.